Welcome to Decoding Healthcare Research. I'm your host, Efrain Riveros, Dr. E.F. Rain. Today we will talk about nutrition. We have been focusing on this important pillar for our health. The other three pillars that we think are critical to remain well and healthy are physical activity, sleep, and emotional stability. Today we are going to talk about nutrition. But in nutrition specifically, we will touch on the role of processed and ultra-processed food on human health. What is the evidence behind the deleterious effect of ultra-processed food on different organ systems? So first of all, I think it's important to recognize that the amount of ultra-processed food that we have in our diets is overwhelmingly high, to the point that in the United States, approximately 57% of the total amount of food that we consume is ultra-processed. And if you make this similar analysis in the younger population, that percentage goes up to 67%. That means 2/3 out of 100 of food is actually ultra-processed in the younger generations, and this is actually bad news. There is a strong association between the consumption of ultra-processed food and different conditions such as diabetes mellitus, metabolic syndrome, obesity, cardiovascular disease, depression, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, among others. So there is a lot of evidence behind all these assertions, and I want to discuss a little bit about that. Regarding diabetes mellitus, there is an interesting cohort study published in BMC Medicine in 2022 by Dr. Duan. And this author found that after following up a group of patients for 41 months, per 10% increase in the amount of ultra-processed food, there was an increase in 25% in the incidence of diabetes mellitus. This is pretty astonishing. And this goes hand in hand with the findings related to obesity. There is a study published in 2021 in the European Journal of Nutrition by Dr. Robert, and he basically used the UK Biobank database to determine that the hazard ratio for obesity was 1.79. That means almost twice as likely to develop in people consuming high amounts of ultra-processed food. So what's the mechanism behind this association? Well, there are multiple hypotheses, but it can be understood that the ultra-processed food has an effect on the intestinal microbiome and also on the intestinal permeability, and this may facilitate the interaction between certain antigens that belong to the lumen of the gut to get in contact with the immune system, specifically the toll-like receptors of the T cells in the intestinal mucosa and submucosa better. So that interaction leads to the activation of an immune response and an inflammatory response with a low-grade inflammation that persists over time, that leads to increase in the concentrations of insulin resistance as well, and oxidative stress that is present in several organ systems. So this is like a common pathway that leads to organic disease at different levels. In terms of cardiovascular disease, there is a study published by Dr. Srour in the British Medical Journal in 2019. The name of the study is Nutrinet Santé. This is a prospective cohort of 105,000 patients, and they found that the hazard ratio for cardiovascular disease is 1.12. Regarding depression, a study published by Contreras in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that in 152 adults, the amount of ultra-processed food was directly associated with depressive symptoms. And more importantly, the MRI of the brain of these patients exhibited a reduction in the volume of some structures of the limbic system, specifically the amygdala. And it's well recognized that the size of the amygdala is related to mood alterations. So it's clear that the use of ultra-processed food is leading to this condition. The severity of multiple sclerosis is another aspect that is worsened by ultra-processed food. There is a study published in Frontiers in Neurology in 2023. The author is Dr. Guglielmetti. He determined that the odds ratio for severity in multiple sclerosis is 2.28, more than twice. So that is critical. What about cancer? Cancer is a pervasive concern in different age groups, and it was found in a large cohort of 625,000 patients published in Frontiers in Nutrition in 2023 by Dr. Lian. This is actually a meta-analysis with this amount of patients. He found that the hazard ratio for colon cancer is 1.25, for breast cancer 1.21, and for prostate cancer is 1.03. So this is remarkable because those are three of the most prevalent malignancies in the general population. So if ultra-processed food is the culprit for all these outcomes, let's try to understand what differentiates ultra-processed food from processed and unprocessed food. So there is a classification that is shedding some light on these aspects. The classification is called the NOVA system. So this NOVA classification divides the foods into four categories or groups. Group 1 corresponds to unprocessed or minimally processed food. Group 2 is processed ingredients for culinary use. Group 3 is processed food, and Group 4 is ultra-processed food. So let's start with the first group, unprocessed and minimally processed food. Sometimes, in order for the food to be available to more people, it needs to undergo some industrial processes that increase or lengthen the shelf life for that particular food. So that is a common practice, and the important point here for Group 1 is that the processes that are used are not adding anything to the original food. So what are the processes that they use during these industrial steps? So the first one is removal of inedible parts of the original food. They can also use drying, grinding, crushing, fractioning, boiling, roasting, pasteurization, refrigeration, and freezing. And they also can use some non-alcoholic fermentation and some packaging processes, including vacuum packaging. So you see here that they haven't really added anything to the original food. The goal is benign, that is basically to make these foods more easily available and ready to use. That is actually a very noble purpose, and it's okay. So we should rest assured that the minimal processing is not bad for our health. So the group number 2 is processed culinary ingredients. What they do here is by means of pressing, centrifuging, refining, and extracting or mining, they get specific components from Group 1 or directly from mines or from the sea. we can obtain salt that way, sugars. We can also get oils and fats and some seasoning ingredients and condiments that can be used in the kitchen. So the combination of group 1 and group 2 are still good for health because in none of these two cases, industrial substances have been added or crazy industrial biochemical processes have been used. So that means that we are safe if we use group 1 and group 2. Let's move on to group 3. Group 3 is processed food. So in the processed food category, we have some foods that are the result of the combination of group 1 and group 2. This is for the sake of convenience, so that the elements or the elements better that that we have in our food are ready to use and are more palatable and more attractive to the final consumer. So they use canning, bottling, non-alcoholic fermentation, and to this category belong handmade bread, also cheese, because it's not really group 1 or group 2, it's the combination of the two when they obtain cheese. And again, the aim is to try to prolong the shelf life and to improve the palatability and appearance of the foods. It's important to emphasize that the Mediterranean diet, some diets that are considered healthy in Japan or Korea, they lean towards group 1 and 2 with occasional incorporation of some foods that belong to group 3. So we can be safe even if you go to group 3 as long as you are sure that the ingredients that are reported are accurate and that they do not include industrial ingredients. This is difficult in some instances because the different agencies in the US and Europe mandate the food industry to report the ingredients above a certain threshold of concentration. So if the concentration of such ingredients that would include industrial ingredients is below that threshold, they can sell it without informing the general public about it. On the other hand, no agency is mandating these food industries to report the processes that they use to come up with their final products. So, in other words, try to consume group 1 and 2 and limit the group 3 to those foods that you consider safe because the ingredients they use are absolutely not in the industry. So examples of these are cheese and some types of bread, not the massively produced bread, but the locally produced bread. Let's go to ultra-processed food. Ultra-processed foods are formulations of industrial ingredients that need industrial processes to incorporate such ingredients into natural foods. That incorporation of the industrial ingredients is not spontaneous, is not natural, so it requires a sequence of steps to make it into a final product that is edible. So we have a series of steps. The first one is fractioning of high-yield natural products, such as corn, wheat, sugar cane, for instance, and they extract high amounts of protein sources, oils, sugars, and then they try to incorporate those elements into the group 1 foods. That is difficult to perform. Actually, what they do is to hydrolyze or perform some kind of hydrogenation of the ingredients that they just extracted from the original food. And this can be done in the case, say, of margarines. So margarines consist of the hydrogenation of some carbon bonds in the unsaturated fats to make them less unsaturated or even saturated. And this falls under the category of trans fats. In other words, trans fats are ultra processed food, and you should stay away from it because it's definitely associated with morbidity and mortality. So once you have performed these chemical processes, you need to incorporate that into the food, and that is extremely difficult. So they need processes such as extrusion, molding, pre-frying to make it into a whole element that can be sold. Unfortunately, after all these processes, in many occasions, the food is not edible, the flavor is horrible, the smell is terrible, and it's easy to guess when you go past one of these factories, the smell that is the odors that are emanating from the factories are terrible. So they need to do something to try to hide those flavors, those smells, and they add ingredients that make it hyper palatable, are more appealing to the view, right? So the ingredients that they use in ultra processing include, on the one hand, food substances that are very rare or non-existent in culinary practice, and on the other hand, we have what we call cosmetics for the food that increase their sensory properties, such as smell and flavor. Now, the foods that I just mentioned are part of a big list, and sometimes it's difficult to know what food in particular is processed or not processed or ultra processed. So I made a list of foods that are ultra processed. It's not exhaustive, but it's representative for the major groups of foods to give you an idea about what to stay away from. So we have carbonated soft drinks, we have chocolates and candies, we have ice cream, mass-produced breads, cookies, biscuits, and pastries, cakes and cake mixes, breakfast cereals, pre-prepared pies, pasta, pizza dishes, poultry and fish sticks and nuggets, sausages, burgers, and hot dogs, as well as instant soups, noodles, and desserts. So I said the list is not exhaustive, but is complete enough to have an idea about what to eat and what not to eat. When you go to the supermarket, those aisles are full of these types of elements. Sometimes it's difficult to identify them in particular. So there are two things that you can do. The first one is to read the ingredient list. If the list is long and has several lines, it's probably not healthy, because that means that they needed to add a lot of stuff to make it edible, right? So usually in that list, the last few ingredients are cosmetics, and the first ones are those ingredients that are of rare use in the kitchen. And usually in the middle is the part of the natural food that is into that particular food. So stay away of long list of ingredients. Stay away from foods that have ingredients that are difficult to pronounce, that you have never heard of, or you did during your chemistry class in college. So if you see all those, even if it says that it's a natural flavor or natural color, it's really ultra processed, right? So keep that in mind, and the use of those cosmetics again, is to make it more attractive to the senses, right? More palatable, more, nicer to the view, a better smell, a better texture, right? So that one way to try to eat healthy is to read over the ingredient list. There is another way, and it's the use of resources that are publicly available. One of them is part of the World Health Organization, and it's called the Codex Alimentarius. You can type the particular ingredient, and it will give you an idea about the different regulations that are in place for that ingredient. In some places that is banned, and some other specifications related to the industry using this ingredient. The other one is a website, openfoodfacts.org. This is a French website that is collecting data and creating a big database that you can access, and you just have to type the name of the food, including the brand name, and it will tell you the category based on the NOVA classification system to which this particular food belongs to. So by doing that, you are going to be more conscious about what you eat, and that way you can stay away from the different complications associated with ultra-processed food. In my opinion, you should stick to group 1 and 2, and occasionally you can use also group 3 to supplement the first two groups, and then you will be safe. I hope this information has been useful. And please don't forget to leave us your feedback. Follow us on YouTube and the different social networks. See you in the next episode.